Thanksgiving. For many, Thanksgiving is a day full of food, family, football, and fun, and a day for being thankful. It's a holiday established to commemorate the pilgrims who arrived on the Mayflower, having a feast with the Wampanoag Indians. Or at least that's what we were taught. As the following reference reads, and it reads, Mayflower Myths. The Mayflower brought the group of English settlers, now known as the Pilgrims, to North America. Leaving England in the fall of 1620, the Pilgrims were attempting to land near the mouth of the Hudson River, but instead ended up in Cape Cod Harbor. Plymouth, the colony established there by the Pilgrims in 1621, became the first permanent European settlement in New England. The story of pilgrims and their harvest feasts has since become one of the best known in American history. But you may not know it as well as you think. Discover the facts behind these well-known Thanksgiving myths. Myth. The first Thanksgiving was in 1621, and the Pilgrims celebrated every year thereafter. Fact. The first feast wasn't repeated, so it wasn't the beginning of a tradition. In fact, the colonists didn't even call the day Thanksgiving. And on to our next reference, which reads, History is never simple. One reason is that spinning an artful narrative out of the messy details of a conquering people can sometimes lead to very much heat and very little light. Take the Pilgrims, for example. In 1620, Pilgrims arrived on the Mayflower, naming the land Plymouth Rock. But the village was already named Patuxent, and the Wampanoag Indians had lived there for thousands of years prior to the Pilgrims' arrival. We like to believe in a festive first Thanksgiving celebration shared life in the New World between the Indians and the Plymouth settlers. Yet, the truth is, as much as it can be ferreted out from the revisions and counter-revisions of historians, appears dramatically different. In 1621, Pilgrims did have a feast, but it was not repeated years after. So, it wasn't the beginning of a Thanksgiving tradition, nor did Pilgrims call it a Thanksgiving feast. Pilgrims perceived Indians in relation to the devil. In Governor William Bradford's words, they, the Indians, were savage people who are cruel, barbarous, and most treacherous. And the more probable reason they were invited to the feast was for the purpose of eventually negotiating a treaty that would secure the lands for the Pilgrims. Perhaps one reason we have so many myths about Thanksgiving is that it is more of an invented tradition than an historical specific one, an amalgamation of the first tense meeting in 1621 for primarily political purposes in a more horrific event that took place nearly 16 years later in 1637, the Pequot Massacre. From colonial times down to present, the story of the Pequot Massacre has been told and retold. Virtually every text on North American Indian Wars or colonialization covers it in the first or second chapters. As the story goes, in 1636, 90 armed settlers went to raid Block Island off the coast because a white man had been found killed on his boat nearby Wet. An armed party landed. They found that the Indians of Block Island had gone into hiding. They burned the villages and crops and returned to the mainland, where for good measure they burned down some Pequot villages. The English went after these Pequots and told them that they were held responsible for the murder. The Pequots had to hand over the remaining murderers and provide assurances about future behavior. The Pequots obstinately refused, in the words of an English eyewitness, and in the resulting fight, several Pequots were killed and wounded, and their belongings destroyed or carried off. Thus started the Pequot War. The Pequots were retired into two strong forts, one of which was situated on the banks of the river Mystique. The other, about 8 miles further, was the headquarters of Sassacus, their sachem, at whose name the Narragansetts trembled, saying, "He was all one, a god. Nobody could kill him." The council of war determined to attack the first fort they should come at, which the Indians took care should not be that where Sassacus was. They made their approach to it in the night, and sent an Indian to observe the posture of the enemy, who found them all in a profound sleep. The army came up to the fort about break of day. Captain Mason, with his company, posted himself on the east and Underhill on the west. But the Narragansetts, like cowards, retired to such a distance as to be only spectators of the action. When the army came within a rod of the fort, a dog barked, awakening the sentinel, who immediately ran away and cried, "Wanuxa! Wanuxa!" i.e., English! English! The soldiers entered the fort at a passage which was only blocked up with bushes about breast high. Captain Mason was the first man that leapt into it, and made good his ground till his men could pull the bushes away. Upon this followed a sharp engagement, in which several of the English were wounded, and many of the Indians killed. But the houses in the fort, being made of nothing but combustible mats, joined close to one another. The English set them on fire, and retired, posting themselves at all the avenues to hinder the enemies making their escape. By the advantage of the wind, carried all before it. Many were burnt to death, which the Narragansetts from a distance, rising ground where they had posted themselves, beheld with infinite pleasure and satisfaction, dancing and whooping all the while, and insulting over the dying enemy. Now let's read another reference which also gives some additional information as to what happened during this assault. And the following reference reads, and it reads, "They approached the same with great silence, and surrounded it both with English and Indians, that they might not break out, and so assaulted them with great courage, shooting amongst them, and entered the fort with great speed. And those that first entered found sharp resistance from the enemy, who both shot and grappled with them. Others ran into their houses and brought out fire and set them on fire, which soon took in their mats, and their houses standing close together. With the wind all was soon on a flame, and thereby more were burnt to death than were otherwise slain. It burnt their bowstrings and made them unserviceable. Those that escaped the fire were slain with the sword, some hewed to pieces, others run through with their rapiers, so as they were quickly dispatched, and very few escaped. The number they thus destroyed was conceived to be above 400. At this time it was a fearful sight to see them thus frying in the fire, and the streams of blood quenching the flame. And horrible was the stink and the scent thereof. But the victory seemed a sweet sacrifice, and they gave praise thereof to God, who had wrought so wonderful for them, thus to enclose their enemies in their hands, and give them a speedy victory over a profound, insulting, and blasphemous enemy. The next day, the governor of Massachusetts Bay Colony declared a day of thanksgiving, thanking God that they had eliminated over 700 men, women, and children. It was signed into law that this day forth shall be a day of celebration and thanksgiving for subduing the Pequots. In other words, Thanksgiving Day is a holiday established to commemorate the burning, killing, and massacre of the Pequot Indians. Unfortunately, many are unaware of the bloody truth behind this tragic day, and many will sit down to feast with family and friends, not knowing that this is a day of mourning for the Pequot Indians. Additionally, many may be surprised to see who the Pequots are today and who they resemble. Well, let's meet today's Pequot Indians. As you can see, Thanksgiving Day is a day which commemorates the burning and killing of colored people. As so-called African Americans and Hebrew Israelites, this is a day of mourning, not a day of celebration. Shalom.